take a look at the current onboarding process and training process that your company already has and try to look at it from the mindset of seeing it for the first time and thinking about what you would think of if that was what was presented to you as you were coming on. And then anytime there's a gap in it where something's not clear, build that out, build it out, build out the documentation. People are really motivated. They'll do a lot of the heavy lifting and the groundwork on their own when they come in, but there needs to be a way for them to answer a lot of the questions that they have. And by having those things codified, having those processes defined, you're going to be able to start doing things in a lot more efficient manner. And you're not going to need 5 rounds of interviews anymore.
Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes, an IRONSCALES podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with security leaders and practitioners and other influential InfoSec stars, so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. CyberSecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, the most powerfully simple email security platform. And I'm your host, Brendan Rudd. And now, let's get into the show. Hey Travis, welcome to the show.
Hey Brendan, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great to have you here today. So before we dive into today's episode, would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about you, your background, and what are you working on these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a security engineering manager at GoVanguard, which is a boutique cybersecurity firm that focuses primarily on penetration testing services. We also do some compliance auditing as well, but for the most part, I work in the penetration testing side of the house. I actually come from a military background. I was a military intelligence officer with the U.S. Army for a few years, and then transitioned into cybersecurity about a year and a half ago, and I've been growing with GoVanguard ever since.
Thank you for sharing. And before we really dive in, can you share one fun fact about yourself?
Yes, this is a little bit quirky, but I mentioned I had a military background. I actually met my wife in China, got engaged in Germany, but we couldn't figure out how to be in the same country at the same time to actually get married. So we got married by mail, which is a thing you can do in the state of Montana. And neither of us have ever been to Montana to this day, but it's legal.
I think that is the most interesting fun fact I've heard so far. It's somewhere on the lines of my fun fact, where each member of my family was born in a different country.
Oh, no way.
So I totally get you. So today's theme and mini series that we're running is how can you onboard or push this notion of hiring juniors or even entry-level folks or folks coming from other sectors that may be adjacent to cybersecurity like IT. How can we train them up? How can we implement programs, the infrastructure in order to train them? So that's really the theme in the mini series that I've put together. And thank you for taking the time to support this project. So let's open up with, how did you get into cybersecurity?
Yeah, so after a few years in the military, I was an intelligence officer. I worked primarily in Eastern Europe with a unit that supported the NSA, and then ended up moving to Fort Irwin, California, in the middle of the Mojave Desert, where I worked on a program to develop a different type of drone technology that was being used. So I kind of got the introduction, less of the intelligence world, more into the technology space, and I found that really, really interesting. So I actually ended up getting a master's degree in information technology management and started to look outside the military, because we just had our baby daughter and was kind of getting sick of having to move every couple of years. So I was looking for what else was out there. And I started leveraging my network on LinkedIn and got in contact with Christian Scott, who's the COO of GoVanguard. And I had actually known him years back, but we'd fallen out of touch just as the years went on. But we got into a little bit of conversation. He kind of explained to me what penetration testing was, and it sounded super interesting. But I was a little intimidated by it. I wasn't a developer. I didn't know how to code or anything like that. When I thought of hacking, even the ethical hacking, I thought of the Matrix, right, with all the green text pouring down the screen. So I had to get educated as to what the reality actually is. And there's a program for service members in the U.S. military called the Career Skills Program, where in the last 6 months of your term of service, you can actually do an internship with a private company to help you gain those skills and ease the transition. It's a win-win because you get those hands-on experience in the industry, and the company that you're working for gets to learn from you, learn from your experience, but also for free because you're still being paid by the U.S. military. It's actually against the regulation for them to provide you compensation. So it really is designed to be a really good win-win. And GoVanguard was gracious enough to let me do that program with them. So I did I think about 5-month internship, full-time internship, starting to learn penetration testing, starting to learn social engineering. I did the Security Plus and Network Plus certifications during that process, kind of build my baseline up, get a little bit more confidence in it. And right after I transitioned out of the military, started, hit the ground running with GoVanguard as a full-time employee, as an information security associate. Kept building that skill set, kept just building and improving on the processes, and then actually was promoted up into the security engineer management position I'm in now, where I focus a lot on refining the processes for our documentation of our techniques, for how we go about doing our penetration tests, how we structure the teams and organize between the testers, the subject matter experts, the report writing, make sure that's all integrated in a way that makes sense, and focusing on bringing in and training the new people up to speed.
Awesome. So essentially, you're a success case of going through a training program, coming in with no cybersecurity experience, and you managed to ramp up. It sounds pretty quickly, and I would love to backtrack and walk through the process and the journey that you took with your company. And what was your company's hiring philosophy?
Yeah, so the philosophy at GoVanguard is really we're more interested in finding good quality people with a high degree of integrity who can work autonomously but can work as well in a team as well. People who are passionate about the topics and want to learn. That means a lot more to us out of the gate than somebody who's got a ton of experience. And it also provides us a whole lot wider range of potential candidates to bring on. So we're a fairly small business. So making sure that we can maintain our company culture, making sure we can maintain our level of detail and quality is absolutely critical to our operation. So being able to choose the people who are the best fits and then train up the skills is something that's worked really, really well for us that we're continuing to do. But in terms of how long did it take me personally to be able to contribute, it was right away. There's a misconceived notion in, I think, cybersecurity in general, but penetration testing especially, that you need to be, a technical wizard to be able to do any of it. That's just not true at all. There's a lot of open source reconnaissance. There's a lot of just general analyzing of the scope of the project, putting together the report, writing a lot of the report, proofreading reports. All of those things can be taught in a fairly short amount of time. It's the deep analysis and the actual exploitation portions of the tests that require the knowledge and experience of someone who's more of a subject matter expert. So the approach that we've taken on a lot of projects is we'll kind of pair them up like a spotter sniper team, as to use a metaphor, where we have that sniper who's the expert on it, who can really, really hammer in on the details. But we've also got the spotter who can do a lot of the groundwork, can do a lot of the reconnaissance, start the scans, get all the data in, get the data organized. Then they can go through together, and the more experienced person can train and mentor the newer folks to get them able to do that deeper analytics to really provide the most insight and the most value. And then the newer folks can do a lot of the report writing, which frees up our subject matter experts to be that expert on more and more and more projects. So it actually increases our efficiency by having these newer folks who are really motivated to learn, working on as many of the things as they can. And each project that they do, it's an iterative progress where maybe the first time out of the gate, someone who's brand new, who came from the healthcare field, doesn't have a lot of technical experience. Well, what can they do? They can proofread reports. We need to do that just as well as anybody else. And these reports that could be, 50, 60, 100 pages long, we can make typos like anybody else. So being able to do that quality control is a valuable asset to the team. And maybe the next time around, they're more comfortable and now they can do some of the vulnerability scanning. Maybe they can pull some of the data. Maybe the next time they're able to do more of the OSINT and even come up with some social engineering campaigns. Each time we build the skill set as the whole team progresses.
No, I love that. Not to undermine the process, but it doesn't sound like rocket science.
Oh, it's not. No.
What I love about it's like we can really show people that it's not that hard. All it requires is just changing the status quo and thinking outside the box. So I love what you guys are doing. Let's start at the beginning. Who creates the job description? What does that process look like? How are you changing things up there?
So our current job role descriptions fit into basically the two sections of work that we do, the compliance side and the security engineering side. So to focus on the security engineering side, I worked with Christian Scott, who's our COO, and Blake Shalem, who is our chief customer officer and also the head of all the customer-facing work, to make sure that we're all on the same page at different echelons of leadership as to what are the skills that we need to come in realistically. What experience do people need to have in order to hit the ground running based on what tier of the position it is, be it security engineer associate, security engineer senior, security engineer, that kind of a thing. And then trying to be realistic in terms of what skills do they need and what skills are just nice to haves and what attributes do they need. So our job descriptions focus a lot more the types of people, the quality, the intangible skills that they need to have, and less focused on like you need to be an OSCP certified. No, we don't require any certifications. If you have one, that's great. That's neat. That shows a lot of personal motivation, that shows a willingness to learn, but it's not a requirement for us. We're not interested in a piece of paper proving what someone told you once. We want to see what skills that you have, how you go about getting your information, what's your critical thinking process, and that type of thing. And that's something that comes a lot more effectively in just one-on-one conversations. And if we can get people into internships first, that's an ideal way to go about it, to assess the skill set.
I want to go a little bit deeper on the critical thinking. What are you looking for when you say critical thinking? What sort of questions were you asked, just to give our audience a bit more insight?
Well, when we think about that, when you're doing any kind of penetration testing, whether it be in a lab, a capture the flag kind of game, or in a real world environment, it's never going to be perfectly straightforward. You're never going to get all your tools working at the same time, especially the open source ones. They break every day. You're never going to see the same environment twice. So being able to look at something and understand what a baseline should be, what a deviation from that looks like, and then how to manage your time and what to focus on and what to research to identify those deviations is something that's really important. And that's a skill set that gets built up over time.
Sorry to interrupt you, but if you're coming in like super green, how would you even know those things? Or would that just be someone that has a better chance of getting the job?
No, not necessarily. So the same philosophy can take on. So if someone is coming in, like I said, super green, if they're coming to us and we're at the point where we're talking to them, we at least know that they're very interested in cybersecurity. Right? They've probably been doing a lot of things to learn on their own, to start building up the skill set, doing some networking, being involved in the community, that type of thing. So the same idea is, what is their baseline of knowledge? How do they identify areas they need to improve on? And what are the things that they've done to try to figure out ways to do that improvement? Did they do the research and figure out that they needed to understand the lexicon of what the language is of the language that's used? Maybe they did some security plus training. Maybe they read some of this books. Maybe they did some hack the box or try hack me labs. We want to look at how creative people are in building up their own skill set and how creative they are in doing their own research into different ways to improve it.
So maybe you could expand a bit on what you look for in a resume before you actually invite someone to the interview, so folks can understand what companies like yourself look for in the resume.
Yeah. So we'll look for the things that you would expect. Do they have a computer science degree? That'd be really cool. Maybe we're just trying to assess what their baseline is. If it's nothing, that's okay. We just want to know. We just need to know. We need to know what we're coming in with so we can ask reasonable questions. But one of the things that we want to look at right away is just what are their communication skills. Written communication and verbal communication are two of the biggest parts of this job, because our deliverable to customers is our insight, right? It's either through our penetration testing reports or the presentations where we provide that insight to the people, in video calls just like this. So if we look at the resumes and they're, not written too well, or they don't really have much experience in domains of general communication, then we're going to have to talk to them a little bit more and really figure out what their comfortability is with writing and verbal communication skills. But that's really it. It's really not too much of a resume deep dive for us. We're more interested in talking to the people and understanding, what are their intrinsic motivations? Why are they wanting to get into this field? What are they doing to set themselves up for success? Where do they see themselves going? What do they want to work on?
And if you get 10 resumes, 50 resumes, you obviously can't spend too much time on so many resumes. What are you looking for at a very high level, surface level approach in the resume? How are you determining who to call back, who to respond to?
We're looking for people who have taken a proactive approach to setting themselves up for the position that we have. So do they talk about maybe they set up their own home lab and started practicing? Do they talk about things that they're studying now or ongoing? Those are things that stand out to us really well. Sure, if they've got some relevant professional education or certification, that's good too. But even just the experience of saying, hey, I have a virtual box-based lab where I am practicing offensive security skills, that's a great thing for us. That tells us they took that extra time and effort to really go above and beyond in it, or trying to build the skills. So those are the kind of the key words, if you will, that we look for when we're facing a huge array of them. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times, most of our new hires have actually been coming from referrals from people within the organization, which is great to see from a leadership standpoint, that people are excited enough about the organization to want to bring in other people on their behalf. But that's been really good. And a lot of those connections are just coming from general networking. And we've brought people on who are just met someone who works there on LinkedIn, had a really good conversation, saw they were doing a lot of being very active in the cybersecurity community, very proactive, really, really interested in learning, easy to teach, and we were able to bring them right in. So yeah, I think involvement in the cybersecurity community would be one of the bigger things too.
Yeah, makes sense. And how many interviews? What does that process like? How many times do you meet with the candidate before making a decision?
It ranges from 1 to 2. If we can get all of the decision makers on the same call at the same time by scheduling, then I've seen 1 be sufficient. I think in the last year, probably half of them was just a single hour-long video call interview that was, very casual, very formal conversation, just trying to get to understand the people. Mostly, we had one hire that required 2, just because of scheduling. It was very hard to get both the department head as well as the company leadership on the call at the same time. So in that case, it was 2. But there's not 5 rounds of interviews like you hear about those horror stories. We're not sending anybody home with these elaborate projects to do or anything like that. That's asinine.
Yes, I agree. And I also like the fact that you're a small team, which really sort of breaks the misconception of like, hey, only big companies can do this. Again, coming back to our previous statement, it's not rocket science. You just need to invest a little bit of time in the process and kind of building up the infrastructure.
Yeah, you just need to have a culture where you want to foster the personal and professional success of the team, right? And that's becomes ingrained to the point where people come in and they have the heart of a teacher and they want to help people grow. Once you have that environment, it becomes very easy to bring new people in and have everybody on the team helping to teach them and wanting to teach them. And not only that, is that those new people that come in who are finally given the chance to break into the industry, it builds a lot of loyalty with those people, and you don't face the same kind of turnover issues that you hear about in so many of the other organizations.
Yeah, and it almost feels like a sort of pay it forward mentality as well. If you start applying this culture across thousands of companies, everybody will sort of have this as a habit, and those people that got a chance will want to pay it forward, and those people that get a chance will want to pay it forward. And this is how I believe the momentum will build and will start to reduce that talent shortage and skills gap.
That's certainly what we've observed in our organization. Everybody who seems to come in that way seems to be really excited to help the next person who comes in to grow and learn what they've learned. And every time someone new comes in, it gets more efficient. Getting them up to speed gets faster because we keep improving the process. Every new person that comes in gets the chance to, improve that onboarding process, improve our process of teaching, and it gets progressively better and better and better. And now we're getting people up to speed much, much faster on, like say, internal and external penetration tests than we could even a year ago, just because teaching people that way has made us better at doing it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a kind of common knowledge that when you teach something, you actually learn it better yourself, and you spend some time rethinking and even maybe questioning yourself at the same time. Like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have been doing it this way. Let's maybe try it this way. Because when you never revisit things, I think that's where the status quo starts to sink in, and you never sort of recheck yourself.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's always a way to do things better, and that seems to come out when you're teaching things.
Exactly. If there's ever complacency, the whole system breaks down. So it's really important to make sure that individually and organizationally, you don't fall into that rut of being complacent. There has to be a culture of always improving things.
Yeah, because at the heart of innovation, I think it's people going back and looking at how we did things before and can we do them better or differently. So again, I think it's really cool. So I want to chat a little bit about what you can teach in a fairly little time with regards to red teaming skills, because that's your company's bread and butter, right? So I'd love to hear from you. What can you teach really quickly?
So when we bring people on, we'll typically start them out with working on external penetration tests. And by that, I mean really the open source intelligence, OSINT reconnaissance, passive reconnaissance. Start teaching a little bit of the active reconnaissance tools, the common ones like Nessus, Nmap, Legion, those kind of things. And they'll be working heavily in the social engineering domain, because social engineering is a huge part of red teaming. In fact, 70% of major breaches have a social engineering component to them. But a lot of the setup for that does not require a great degree of technical acumen. It just requires good attention to detail. So what do I mean by that? Well, doing the organizational reconnaissance and figuring out who's reporting to who's the head of HR at that organization, what external insurance company do they use? Maybe we want to do something that goes that route. Finding those things, we can teach those skills quickly. Setting up fake social engineering profiles to reach out to people, staging email drafts, writing up phishing emails or quality phishing emails, not the ones riddled with spelling errors like you see on a lot of cybersecurity awareness training. Coming up with good phishing portals we want to use, or even just the concepts. All of those things, it doesn't take a seasoned engineer to do that. It just takes somebody who, has a good understanding of the human condition and what would motivate people to click on them. And bringing people in from so many different backgrounds has actually really improved our social engineering program, because we get a whole different perspective from people who were working in healthcare versus working in military versus working in robotics. All those things, the different aspects of it have grown into our repertoire tremendously. So when people are first starting to come in, they'll do a lot of setup of social engineering campaigns. They'll do a lot of staging of phishing emails or calling people up and doing the phishing, voice phishing, as well as doing the initial reconnaissance stages. And those are the technical skills we start with. And they'll also work a lot on writing reports and proofreading the reports as well. And then over time, we progress them from there logically into more of the technical side of the external attack process, and then into the internal network penetration testing, which does inherently require a little bit more expertise in terms of networking fundamentals and utilizing a lot of different tools. So that's sort of the progression. And in terms of timeline, I mean, we had a guy who came in, was working previously in physical therapy, and I would say he was adding real value to the organization through working on the social engineering, through working on reports, improving the language we use, making things more concise, probably on the third day.
Wow, that's impressive. I really love that you guys are doing this from a red teaming standpoint, because most entry-level jobs or junior cyber jobs that I've heard people talking about is like help desk or SOC, right? And it seems like there is this misconception that red teaming, it's only for penetration testers with lots of experience. So what's different in your company's approach towards pen testing?
Well, we don't have just one penetration tester or one security engineer working at any given project. We use the buddy system. We double check each other. We make sure that things are validated. So we've got people who are able to, really do a really tremendous job on the more complicated side of penetration testing, like mobile applications and APIs and very complex web apps. And we've got a lot of people who can do internal and external networking. And we pair them up together on projects a lot of times so that everybody can keep progressing their skills, but also to make sure that nothing goes missed. Because that's one of the biggest things that we have to be cognizant of, is we need to understand that as people are learning these skills, no one's perfect. It can be easy to miss something. So we trust people to do the techniques that are in line with the skills that they have. But we do have subject matter experts who verify that testing data, make sure that there's nothing major that got missed. And in any case that something does get missed, we make sure that that becomes a training opportunity for those people, and it gets addressed and into the report. Customers are aware of it before it ever goes out the door. So it is part of our pipeline to make sure that that opportunity for confirmation, validation, and training is actually in our project pipeline.
So if I understood, this sort of buddy system is really the catalyst for bringing in junior folks. The experienced red teamer will pair up with the junior and they will free them up to do the more technical side of penetration testing and red teaming activities.
That's exactly right, because there'll be an aspect where we might have somebody who's extremely talented, who has years and years and years of experience doing all this stuff, but that particular engagement requires social engineering, and now we need this guy to go stage 200 phishing emails. That's not a great use of an hour and a half of that expert's time, but one of the new people could really help out and do that. And then in exchange, the experienced people can take some time to teach them new skills and techniques, which is a much better use of their time to share that knowledge. So it's been a big productivity boost to take this approach for us.
That's super smart. What does the ramp up and onboarding process look like? I'd love to I think this is the meat of the conversation here, where we really lay it out for folks like, hey, this is the 4 or 5 step process. I'll let you run with it, but if you miss something, I'll just...
Okay, sounds good. So when people come on, we have an initial onboarding meeting with them, and then we usually go right into our daily stand-up meeting, which we do every single day, where everybody in the company, from the intern who's on their first day to the CEO, goes down a line of the major things that they're working on and their priorities for that day. And that's just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And if we need to reprioritize anybody or any projects, we can do that with group understanding. And that's been a very, very helpful thing. So for, say, in the first week or so of a new security engineer coming on, we're going to be adding them to a lot of internal working groups, just for them to be a fly on the wall, to start to understand our process, how we operate with each other. We're a fully remote organization. We do not have a physical location. So it is a lot of different video calls, a lot of different web cloud-based softwares that we use. So getting them accustomed to those things. We'll involve them in a lot of customer-facing meetings where they can listen and observe and see what it is that we actually present. What are our deliverables? And what kind of questions do we receive back, to get them an idea of the things that they need to focus on? And their white space in between on the calendar, in between those meetings, is going to be familiarizing themselves with the documentation that we have for what kind of project is it? Okay, it's an external that we're going to think about. Okay, what's the checklist of things we need to make sure gets done for that? Okay, I get that. Well, I don't understand what this is. So then reading deeper into that and understanding where to look for the information, where to find those references, is one of the things we want to get to right away. Then what we'll do is a weekly training check-in with them every week for the first few months, where we sit down and we craft a training program for them. It could be something like the PNPT by TCM Security, the Practical Network Penetration Tester certification. Very hands-on, very practical. We like that one a lot. Maybe that's what makes sense for them because their goal is to do internal penetration testing in Windows environments. Maybe that's perfect. If that's the kind of projects that we're envisioning them working on in the next 2 weeks, 2 months, that kind of thing, we'll try to make sure that the training that we have them doing is in line with the projects that are upcoming to increase the speed at which that they can come on board. That where too, if they're someone who comes on and they're really interested in web applications, maybe the training programs could be totally different, and we want to focus on some of the port swigger material, people who make Burp Suite, and get them really comfortable with Burp Suite. So it's a very tailored approach, not only based on what we need as an organization from our testers, but we try to match as much as possible what they're going to be doing and what training we're going to have them do with what they are interested in. And we've had a much better result doing that.
And I would love to get some behind the scenes of how you actually create that documentation. Is it distributed among the team where everyone just sort of fills in specific training pieces? How do you categorize the training? How do you delegate the training, actually writing it up, et cetera, before it's ready for someone to use? And is that an ongoing process, or once you have a good amount of training material, you're pretty good for, 6 months before you need to revise it?
Yeah, good question. So we're a Microsoft shop, so a lot of our documentation is just using Microsoft OneNote. Everybody has access to it. They know where to find it. It's very well organized. And we treat all of our documentation as living documents because so often, there'll be a new update on something, and maybe we have, descriptions for how to set up a link local multicast name resolution poisoning attack, right, with a responder. Well, the flags that worked for that a year ago, that might have changed in the new version. So we always have to keep updating, making sure the documentation stays fresh, stays up to date. And that's actually one of the things that new hires will help us with too, is when they go through and they follow the documentation, if they get stuck on it somewhere and they have to troubleshoot it, we'll have them redo that part of the documentation to make sure we have the current information. It gives them a lot of ownership on the process, feels like they're contributing a lot, which they are. And it improves us organizationally going forward. So that's really good. In terms of the training, that's usually going to be something that we use more of a week-to-week basis, because we're not necessarily going to say like, okay, we just purchased you the EJPT all access pass to get that cert. All right, we'll talk in 4 months when you got it. It's not like that at all. We stay really hands-on. We want to make sure that what they're doing is practically aligned to the projects that are coming up. If they are super motivated to get the certification, we support that. We pay for that. But we want to make sure that they don't feel like they're doing something just for the sake of getting a piece of paper. They're doing it because it's going to make their job easier when their next project comes up. And that requires constant touch points, making sure that if they're doing some Windows Active Directory attacks, but they don't quite understand what Kerberos is, okay, we need to back up a little bit and focus in on that and then come back to this. So we want to make sure that it is a curated approach to training each and every individual on the organization.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept, to certify people once they are in a job and are either doing something they enjoy, or, to your point, to bolster what they need to do, versus going and getting all these certs without sort of knowing what direction you're going to go into. I think that's pretty interesting of an approach.
That's exactly right.
Very cool. And is there like a focal person that owns the training structure? Because if everyone owns it, maybe no one owns it. I'm just interested to know how that works in your company.
For the new hires that come in, the new information security associates, I'm the lead person for putting together the training programs for them. That's part of my role.
Got it. And then you talked about a physical therapist that was up and running and contributing to the team. I think you said in 4 days.
Yeah, very quickly. He's a super motivated person, really has a passion for learning this, is very interested, and you can tell, we could tell that the first time we talked to him, that he was going to be someone who was going to dive deep into this and wanted to be involved in it. And yeah, he's been with us a few weeks now and is just doing a great job.
That's awesome. So you mentioned a little bit about like how and when you start to introduce certifications or courses. Can you speak a bit more to that? When do you start teaching tools? Where do you start, and what you find very effective?
That depends a lot on the baseline of the people who are coming in, right? Sometimes we have people who have absolutely no knowledge whatsoever, and we need to start with like, this is a port scanner, this is Nmap, and we really baseline it. Other times people come in and they've got a lot of experience with different labs. Maybe they've done a lot of try hack me rooms. They know Nmap, they know Metasploit, they know Burp Suite a little bit. It has to be tailored. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, because the people that we come in are all different levels of their training or their transition into cyber process. But we teach them the tools that they need when they need them for the projects that they're doing, if that makes sense. So off the bat, if you're going to do a lot of open source reconnaissance, having some tools that can scrape email addresses off of social media, there's some Python tools that do that are easy to learn. Those would be something we do right away. Having some tools that are made for open source reconnaissance, like Multigo, that's something that they're going to learn right away. And then as we progress farther from the passive and we start going into active reconnaissance, when we talk about things like OpenVAS, Nmap, Nessus, as we're doing them in projects, we'll show them, but we'll also let them configure it and let them run it, and we'll mentor them as they're doing that so they get the practice right away. So we don't time gate it, and it's not like after a few weeks, okay, now you're allowed to use Burp Suite Pro's scanner. No. When a tool is necessary for a project they're involved in, we're going to teach it to them then.
Yes, that makes sense. So you're taking the CERT approach to tools as well when they're working on a task that they need to learn a tool, or you're matching them up, as you said, with projects they're working on with the tools or the tools plus the courses.
That's exactly right.
Great. And then what does the overall sort of onboarding timeline look like? I know it depends, and you mentioned everyone, which is great that you're flexible. And I think that's another point, that the importance of having flexibility in your training infrastructure for people coming in at different levels. But if you were to sort of average it out, what would you say is the overall onboarding timeline for someone coming in?
From first day,
fresh, let's say completely fresh.
From first day of someone brand new to being primary on a project where they'll still have a subject matter expert as a mentor there to double check and to coach, but for them to do the majority of the heavy lifting on it, we're looking anywhere from 30 to 60 days on the person. But that's for the whole kit and caboodle of something, right? When we're talking about components of it that they can do to add value and save people time, second week.
It's really impressive, especially again, that you're such a small team that you can do this. And it seems like you're having those repeatable results time and time again, right?
Yeah, we're well practiced with it right now, and we try to improve on the process, every time that we have the opportunity to. So we elicit a lot of feedback from new folks. We sit down, we'll have all the company leadership sit down with them and go over, hey, how did your onboarding process go? What did you find effective? What was not so effective? Were there any meetings you were in that you felt was, maybe not the best use of your time? We want to get that constructive criticism back, because it's the only way for us to really improve it. And we have a culture that supports, it encourages constructive criticism all levels of the organization. And that's and that's something that's really important too, in order to make that kind of a hiring process successful.
Yeah, it really feels like you need to treat your training and onboarding as a product. So that requires feedback and iterations and optimizations. This has been great. I really learned a lot, and I hope that people can go and take some of these lessons learned and maybe start small. Before we wrap up here, where would you recommend companies start if they would like to start building this training onboarding program in-house? Like, where could you get the most bang for your buck as a first step?
Take a look at the current onboarding process and training process that your company already has, and try to look at it from the mindset of seeing it for the first time and thinking about what you would think of if that was what was presented to you as you were coming on. And then anytime there's a gap in it where something's not clear, build that out, build out the documentation. People are really motivated. They'll do a lot of the heavy lifting and the groundwork on their own when they come in, but there needs to be a way for them to answer a lot of the questions that they have. And by having those things codified, having those processes defined, you're going to be able to start doing things in a lot more efficient manner, and you're not going to need 5 rounds of interviews anymore.
So let's take it to companies that do not yet have a training process in place. Would you recommend the first place to start is with simple documentation?
Absolutely. They need to be able to know what are the steps of what their actual job duties are going to be. What do they actually need to learn, right? Because whether it be on the red team or it be perhaps a SOC analyst, there's such a huge width and depth of the field of that information that telling someone to study up on cybersecurity is a useless piece of feedback for anybody, right? It needs to be focused on things that are going to be directly related to what they're doing. And then they can expand to things maybe they're not doing yet, but they want to be doing in the future, or maybe something the organization that could improve the organization in the future. But they need to they need to know what it is that's going to be expected. What are the things that they need to do so that they can get up to speed on that as quickly as possible?
It makes perfect sense. And as we wrap up here today, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out this episode?
Oh, I just want to say I really appreciate what you're doing, Brandon, with this podcast and getting the word out there that there are a lot of really talented people looking to break into the industry. And if we can get out of the old mindset that you need 5 years of experience in the OSCP to have a conversation with somebody, people will be able to see that there are a lot of people that can bring a lot of really good skills to the table. It's not a Herculean task to train them up. So kudos to you and your team for putting all this together.
Yeah, no, and we couldn't do it without folks like yourself sharing the gospel. So thank you for coming on to the show and sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate that. If people would like to reach out to you and chat more about what we talked about today, where's the best, easiest place for people to connect with you?
You can find me right on LinkedIn. Just search up Travis DeForge, and I'll be on there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Travis, and to everyone for tuning into CyberSecurity Heroes. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of CyberSecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing or following through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.